Harvard's brightest math students freeze at the board, an impossible problem mocking them all. Then, from the back row, a 10-year-old girl raises her hand. Laughter erupts. They think she's just a photo op, but what happens next silences the entire room. Hello, my amazing story family. I'm excited to have you here with me today because what you're about to hear will leave you amazed. But first, before we get into the story, I need one little favor from you. Please hit that subscribe button if you're ready for a story that'll give you goosebumps, and also drop a comment telling me your city because I love knowing where my story family is tuning in from around the world. And if you've already subscribed and joined this story family, you are welcome back. Tomorrow I'm bringing you another incredible story that you absolutely won't want to miss. Now, let's jump right into today's story and see what unfolds. The lecture hall at Harvard University looked more like a cathedral of intellect than a classroom. Morning sunlight streamed through tall arched windows, filling the room with a golden glow that danced across polished oak desks. The air buzzed with a nervous energy, the kind that came only when the brightest students in the country gathered to prove they were brighter than the person sitting next to them. On the wide chalkboard at the front of the room, written in bold strokes of white, was a problem that had lived in whispers among mathematicians for decades. It was said to be unsolvable, at least for students. A problem professors sometimes dangled as a way of reminding their pupils that even the sharpest minds could bend and break. The senior class sat huddled together, their notebooks spread open like battle shields, pencils tapping, brows furrowed. Some scribbled furiously, others stared into space as if the ceiling itself might provide divine inspiration. Every student had been told this morning's test would separate the ordinary from the legendary. And yet, silence. For nearly 40 minutes, not a single hand had risen. Pages filled with aborted calculations. Erasers rubbed holes into paper. One by one, heads shook, shoulders slumped. The best of Harvard had no answer. At the back of the hall, almost hidden, sat a small figure. Her chair seemed too big for her frame, her backpack resting against her feet like a loyal dog. Celine Jackson, 10 years old, daughter of the campus janitor, watched the chaos unfold with wide but steady eyes. She had been told to keep quiet, to observe, to learn from the giants. And she had obeyed until now. Celine's hand rose slowly into the air. At first, no one noticed. The rustle of failure was too loud. But then Bradley Sterling, golden-haired legacy student, heir to a family whose name was carved into a Harvard library wall, caught sight of it. A smirk spread across his face. He jabbed his friend Connor in the ribs. "Look," Bradley whispered, loud enough for the row to hear. "The mascot wants to play." Laughter rippled through the room. Heads turned. The sight of a child raising her hand in a room of seniors struck many as absurd. Some chuckled, others rolled their eyes, but none more sharply than Professor Whitmore at the podium. His voice sliced through the air. "Miss Jackson," he said, drawing out the syllables as if they carried dirt. "This is Harvard's advanced Putnam preparation, not elementary school arithmetic." The laughter grew louder. One girl, Jessica Chen, pretended to clap. "Ah, adorable," she said. "Should we get her crayons?" Celine's cheeks burned, but her hand didn't waver. Her mother's words echoed in her mind. "You don't let them tell you who you are. You show them." "Professor," she said softly, "may I try?" The room froze. For a moment, the golden sunlight felt sharper, like a spotlight. Whitmore's lips curled, ready to dismiss her, but before he could, another voice cut in. Calm, measured, firm. "Let her." It was Professor Williams Marcus, seated in the corner with his notebook balanced on his knee. He had been invited as a guest observer, but now his words carried weight. His dark eyes held Whitmore's, daring him to refuse. The tension thickened. Finally, with a wave of his hand, Whitmore relented. "Fine. But make it quick. We have real students waiting." Celine rose from her chair. Her small footsteps echoed against the wooden floor as she walked toward the board, each step a drumbeat in the silence. The seniors leaned forward, some with smirks, others with narrowed eyes. Connor stretched his leg out slightly, as if to trip her, but she sidestepped without looking. When she reached the board, she paused. Chalk in hand, she stared at the problem. Numbers swirled in her mind like constellations rearranging themselves into patterns only she could see. She didn't think about Harvard, or the laughter, or the eyes digging into her back. She thought only of the beauty of the numbers, the way they danced when treated with respect. Then she began to write. At first it looked random. A line here, a curve there, a strange detour into a formula no one had considered. Bradley leaned back, chuckling. "She's doodling," he muttered. But then her pattern emerged. Equations folded into each other like puzzle pieces clicking into place. What seemed chaotic revealed itself as deliberate. Heads tilted. Pens stopped tapping. Even Jessica's smirk faltered. Within minutes, the laughter had died. The only sound was chalk against slate, quick but graceful, like music playing without instruments. By the time Celine dropped the chalk, the board was a symphony of numbers. Elegant, clean, undeniable. She stepped back, hands dusted white, and turned to face the room. "Done," she said simply. The silence that followed was not the silence of boredom or failure. It was the silence of disbelief. Whitmore's jaw tightened. His eyes darted across the board, searching for an error, a flaw, anything to tear her down with. The seniors leaned closer, notebooks forgotten. Bradley's smirk was gone, replaced with something harder to name. Was it anger? Or fear? And then it happened. A voice from the back. Hesitant at first, then certain. "She's right." It was Jessica. The girl who had mocked her seconds ago now stared at the proof with awe. She shook her head slowly, her voice trembling. She actually solved it. A wave of murmurs filled the room. Some students gasped, others whispered furiously, but none could argue. The impossible had been done, not by Harvard's brightest seniors, but by the janitor's daughter. Whitmore gripped the podium until his knuckles whitened. He opened his mouth to speak, to claw back authority, when the heavy oak doors at the back of the hall creaked open. Every head turned. Standing there was a man whose reputation needed no introduction. His name alone carried the weight of genius, a Fields Medal winner whispered about in every math circle. Terence Tao. And his eyes were fixed not on the seniors, not on Whitmore, but on Celine Jackson. For a long moment, the lecture hall seemed suspended in another world. The sunlight streaming through the high windows painted golden stripes across the board, illuminating the proof Celine had written like it was a work of art, not just mathematics. Terence Tao's presence shifted the air. Even the seniors, who moments ago had scoffed at the girl, now sat frozen. They had studied his papers, cited his theories, even dreamed of meeting him one day. And here he was, standing in the doorway, his eyes fixed not on them but on a child who barely reached the middle of the chalkboard. Professor Whitmore was the first to move. His voice cracked slightly as he spoke. "Professor Tao. What an unexpected surprise." Tao's gaze didn't leave Celine. Slowly, he stepped into the room, each footfall echoing on the polished wood. His calm expression gave nothing away, but the intensity in his eyes was impossible to ignore. "What's your name?" he asked gently. Celine swallowed hard. She felt every pair of eyes on her, waiting to see if she would stumble now that the spotlight was truly on her. But she straightened her shoulders, the way her mother always told her to do when the world tried to make her small. "Celine Jackson," she said softly. Tao nodded, then turned his attention to the board. His eyes scanned line by line, following her thought process, his lips pressing together in concentration. A murmur ran through the class as the world's greatest living mathematician traced the work of a 10-year-old girl. Finally, Tao set the chalk down and turned back to the room. "She didn't just solve it," he said, his voice calm but ringing with certainty. "She found a new pathway I haven't seen before." Gasps rippled through the hall. Jessica covered her mouth, Bradley's face flushed crimson, and Connor's eyes darted nervously as though trying to spot a hidden trick. Whitmore's jaw locked. "With all due respect, Professor, she's a child. Surely this—" Tao cut him off without raising his voice. "Genius doesn't ask permission to appear. It reveals itself." The words hit like thunder. Celine felt her chest tighten. She had dreamed of moments like this, being seen, being believed, but she had never imagined they would come so quickly, or in front of the very people who had laughed at her. But before the weight of those words could settle, Bradley stood. His voice was loud, sharp, desperate. "This is ridiculous. She must have memorized something. Or maybe you gave it to her." He jabbed a finger toward Tao, his voice cracking. "This isn't real. It can't be." Celine turned her eyes toward him, not with anger but with a calm steadiness that seemed to unnerve him even more. She didn't answer because the proof already had. Marcus Williams finally rose from his seat in the corner. He stepped into the aisle, his presence commanding even without raising his voice. "Every one of you had the same chance she did. The same chalk, the same board, the same time. None of you could find the path. She did. And you don't get to erase her brilliance because it doesn't fit your idea of who belongs here." A heavy silence followed. Outside, a gust of wind rattled the ivy against the window, as if the world itself had leaned closer to listen. Then, as if to puncture the silence, Connor let out a low chuckle. "Well," he said, shaking his head, "let's see how long she lasts once she doesn't have a famous babysitter around." Bradley smirked, seizing the lifeline. "Yeah. One proof doesn't make you Harvard material. This place chews people up. Let's see how you handle the real competition." It wasn't said to Celine, it was thrown like a shield toward the rest of the class, an attempt to salvage their pride. And judging by the nods and murmurs, it worked. The tide of ridicule hadn't ended. It had simply shifted shape. Celine felt the burn of their words, but when she looked at Marcus Williams and then at Tao, she saw something stronger than doubt. She saw belief. Her mother's voice whispered in her mind again. "Baby, when they laugh at you, that's when you're closest to shaking their world." She exhaled, letting the fear leave her with the breath. For the rest of the lecture, the students hardly heard a word of Whitmore's teaching. Their minds were too tangled in disbelief, in jealousy, in the nagging truth that the janitor's daughter had accomplished what they could not. When the class finally ended, groups huddled together in whispers. Bradley stormed out without a word, Connor trailing behind, already scheming. Jessica lingered by the door, her face unreadable. Celine packed her small backpack slowly. Her hands trembled, but not from fear anymore, from the electricity of what had just happened. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but today she had stepped into the lion's den and refused to be swallowed. As she walked out of the hall, sunlight washed over her once more. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, letting its warmth settle into her skin like a promise. Somewhere deep inside she knew this was only the beginning. And right here we'll pause the story. If you've been drawn in by Celine's courage and the way she stunned Harvard's best, imagine what happens when the challenges get even harder. Trust me, this journey is only going to get more intense. If you're enjoying the story so far, don't forget to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel. It helps us reach more people with amazing stories like this. The campus courtyard was alive with chatter that afternoon, but none of it felt ordinary. Word of what had happened in the lecture hall had spread faster than wildfire. By the time Celine left the mathematics building, Clusters of students leaned together in whispers, glancing her way with a mixture of curiosity, disbelief, and envy. Some stared as though she was a trick of the light, a story too outrageous to be real. Others scoffed, muttering that the board must have been staged. A few just looked angry, as if her existence alone was an insult to their years of study. Celine tried to keep her step steady as she crossed the courtyard, clutching the straps of her backpack. The ground beneath her sneakers seemed heavier than usual. She had wanted to prove she belonged, but she hadn't expected her proof to echo across Harvard like a storm bell. Waiting for her at the gate was her mother, Sarah Jackson, wearing her custodian's uniform. The smile on her face was wide enough to erase every cruel whisper. "How was class, baby girl?" Sarah asked, reaching to tuck a stray braid behind Celine's ear. Celine hesitated, then allowed herself a small smile. I solved something. A hard problem." Sarah's eyes softened with pride. "Of course you did. You've been solving problems since you were 3. She leaned down, lowering her voice. "Don't let their noise shake you. You shine no matter what room you're in." For a moment, the world shrank to just the two of them, mother and daughter anchored in each other's presence. But that peace didn't last long. From across the courtyard, Bradley Sterling strode forward, his expensive blazer catching the light. Connor trailed behind him, carrying 2 coffee cups, his smirk already carved deep. "Well, if it isn't Harvard's new mascot," Bradley sneered. "Enjoy your little magic trick this morning? Don't get too comfortable." Sarah straightened, placing a hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Excuse me." Bradley ignored her. His eyes were locked on Celine. "This place isn't a playground. You embarrassed a lot of people today. People who matter. And when people like that get embarrassed, they don't forget." Connor held out one of the coffees toward Bradley, but accidentally tilted it just enough for a few drops to splash near Celine's shoes. He gave a laugh, low and sharp. "Oops. Guess some things are too hard for kids to handle, huh?" Sarah stepped forward, her voice firm. "Back off." The courtyard had quieted. Students watched from the benches and paths, pretending not to listen but hanging on every word. Before Bradley could reply, another figure appeared, Professor Williams Marcus. His tall frame cast a long shadow as he approached, and his voice carried easily over the tension. "Sterling. Walsh. Is this how Harvard's finest represent themselves?" Bradley stiffened, his jaw tightening. Connor looked down, muttering something about having class. The two of them retreated, but not without one last glare over their shoulders. Williams crouched slightly to meet Celine's eyes. "Don't give them your energy," he said gently. "They thrive on getting a reaction. Let your work do the talking. It always will." Celine nodded, though her chest still felt heavy. She had faced mockery before, but never at this scale, never with so many eyes watching, waiting for her to fall. That evening, in the quiet of the dorm room Harvard had assigned her, she sat by the wide window. The room had been designed to capture natural light even in the late hours, and now the fading orange of the sunset spilled across her desk. It cast her notebook in a glow that felt almost protective. She opened a fresh page and began scribbling. Equations, patterns, fragments of thoughts that had swirled in her mind since the lecture. The numbers didn't laugh. The numbers didn't doubt. They simply waited to be understood. Still, her concentration was broken by the echoes of whispers she had overheard all day. "She doesn't belong here. She's a quota. A janitor's kid in Harvard's halls? Impossible." Her hand tightened around her pencil. For the first time, she wondered, not about her ability, but about her strength. Could she keep walking through halls filled with eyes that only saw her as an intruder? Before the fear could settle, she heard a soft knock on the door. When she opened it, Jessica Chen stood there, her expression unreadable. Celine froze. She hadn't forgotten the mocking words Jessica had thrown at her that morning. Jessica shifted awkwardly, holding a notebook. Look, I don't know what happened in there today. But I know what I saw. And what I saw was brilliant. Celine blinked, unsure whether this was another trap. Jessica sighed, glancing over her shoulder as if afraid to be seen. Don't think I'm your friend. I'm not. But I don't like being lied to. And you proved you're not a lie. She shoved the notebook forward. If you ever want someone to compare solutions with, knock on my door. Without another word, she turned and walked down the hall, leaving Celine staring at the notebook in her hands. For the first time that day, a flicker of something unexpected stirred inside her. Not just hope, but the sense that maybe, just maybe, allies could appear in the most unlikely places. The next morning, Celine walked into the mathematics building with her backpack hugged tightly to her chest. The hall seemed louder than usual, not because of voices but because of the unspoken weight that followed her steps. Everywhere she turned, eyes lingered too long. Some curious, some cold, some brimming with jealousy. When she entered the study room reserved for Putnam preparation, the air felt sharp. Bradley and Connor were already there, their laughter echoing too loudly. On the table beside them sat a stack of fresh problem sheets. Jessica was at the far end, hunched over her notebook, deliberately not looking at anyone. When Celine sat down, Jessica's eyes flicked up for just a second before returning to the page. Professor Whitmore arrived moments later, his shoes clicking against the floor. His expression was pinched, the lines on his face tighter than usual. He dropped a thick folder on the desk. Today, he said, we'll see whether yesterday was a fluke. Each of you will take one of these sheets. No collaboration. No excuses. His gaze landed on Celine and lingered. And this time, shortcuts won't help you. He handed out the problems, his movements sharp, almost theatrical. When the paper slid in front of her, Celine's heart skipped. It wasn't the difficulty that startled her. It was the deliberate cruelty of the selection. These weren't practice-level questions. They were problems meant to crush confidence, to grind down even the most seasoned students. Around her, pencils scratched furiously. Bradley hunched over his page, jaw clenched. Connor smirked and scribbled nonsense, clearly more interested in the spectacle than the solution. Celine closed her eyes. She let the noise fade, drawing instead on the rhythm she always returned to when the world pressed too hard. Breathe in, breathe out, let the numbers speak. She began writing, slowly at first, then faster as connection sparked. The page filled with symbols and patterns that stitched themselves into meaning. She felt herself slipping into that quiet space where math was not just work, but language, song, even prayer. Halfway through, her concentration broke. A loud thud jolted her. Connor's elbow had accidentally knocked her pencil from the table, sending it rolling across the floor. Oops, he muttered, not bothering to hide his grin. Whitmore didn't even glance up. Celine bent to retrieve the pencil. When she sat back, her paper was gone. Her desk was empty. Bradley leaned back in his chair, her worksheet folded neatly in his lap. His smile was all teeth. Lose something. Her stomach dropped. She reached across, but he slid the paper further away. Careful, he said softly. Wouldn't want your big reputation to get ruined if you fail. Jessica's head shot up, her eyes narrowing. Give it back. Bradley laughed. Why? She wants to prove she belongs, right? Let's see how she does under pressure. For the first time, Whitmore raised his head. Not to scold Bradley, not to restore fairness, but to watch. His arms folded, and he leaned against the desk as though curious how far this would go. Celine's hand shook, but not from fear. From anger. The kind that burned cold instead of hot. Slowly, she pushed back her chair and stood. "If you think I need a piece of paper to solve your problems," she said quietly, "then maybe you don't understand math at all." She turned to the board. With steady strokes, she began rewriting her solution from memory. Bradley's smirk faltered. The further she wrote, the clearer it became that her recall was flawless. Even Jessica looked stunned, her eyes flicking from the board to the speed of Celine's hand. By the time she dropped the chalk, the solution was complete. Clean. Precise. Undeniable. The room was silent except for the sound of Celine pulling out her chair and sitting back down. She opened her notebook and picked up her pencil as if nothing had happened. Jessica let out a soft laugh, shaking her head in disbelief. Bradley shoved Celine's stolen worksheet back onto her desk, his face tight with frustration. Whitmore's jaw worked silently. He muttered something about moving on and began pacing at the front of the room. But the damage was done. The test had turned into a stage, and Celine had owned it. That night, alone in her dorm, she replayed the moment in her mind. The anger, the fear, the fire that had steadied her hand. For the first time, she realized something powerful. Every attempt to break her was only sharpening her resolve. She looked out the window, where the moonlight spread silver across the courtyard, soft and natural against the ivy-covered walls. She whispered to herself, a vow that felt larger than her years. "They'll remember me. Not because I fought back, but because I solved what they said couldn't be solved." The following week, the math department at Harvard was buzzing like a disturbed hive. Professors murmured in corridors, graduate students lingered near bulletin boards pretending to check notices while really trading whispers, and undergraduates carried rumors from one lecture hall to another. Everywhere Celine went, she heard fragments. "Did you see the board? A trick. It has to be." No, Tao confirmed it. He said she found something new. Her name was no longer just a whisper. It had become a test of belief. Some spoke it with awe, others with bitterness, but no one ignored it. Celine tried to block out the noise, but it pressed against her like an invisible weight. The one place she could breathe was the library. Harvard's library was enormous, a maze of polished wood and towering shelves, where sunlight spilled through high windows and dust motes floated lazily in the beams. The scent of old pages was comforting, grounding. She often sat in the quiet corners where the light fell gently over her notebook. Numbers didn't laugh at her. They didn't scheme. They welcomed her like old friends. It was in that library where Professor Williams Marcus found her one afternoon. He moved with quiet dignity, his steps measured, his presence calm but firm. He pulled out a chair and sat across from her. "You've stirred the waters," he said with a faint smile. "And when waters stir, storms tend to follow." Celine closed her notebook, her fingers brushing over the filled pages. "I didn't mean to." "Greatness rarely means to," Marcus replied. "But you need to understand something. What you did wasn't just about solving a problem. You embarrassed people who have built their lives on the idea that they are the smartest in every room. And when pride is wounded, people don't heal quietly." She lowered her eyes. "Bradley, Connor, and others," Marcus said softly. "Students, faculty, even administrators. Not all will oppose you, but enough will that you'll need more than equations to navigate this place. You'll need resilience, strategy, allies." The word allies made her think of Jessica Chen, who had slipped her that notebook days ago. She hadn't opened it yet, afraid of what she might find. Was it genuine? Or another trap? Marcus leaned forward. "Celine, your mind is a gift. But don't let them twist it into a curse. Use it, yes, but guard it. Protect yourself. Because I promise you, the storm is coming." As if on cue, The storm arrived sooner than either expected. The next morning, Celine walked into class to find the chalkboard covered in equations. Not elegant proofs or challenging questions, but crude drawings, a childlike scrawl mocking her name. Words like mascot and photo op sprawled across the slate in harsh strokes. Someone had even drawn a stick figure with pigtails holding a mop. The room erupted with laughter when she entered. Bradley lounged in the corner, his smirk wide, while Connor slapped the desk as though the joke was the height of comedy. Celine froze in the doorway. Heat rose to her face. For a second, her legs wanted to turn and run. But then she saw Jessica. The girl wasn't laughing. She sat stiffly, her jaw tight, her eyes darting toward Celine with something that looked almost like shame. Celine took a slow breath, then walked to the board. She didn't erase the drawings. She didn't acknowledge them. Instead, she picked up a piece of chalk and began writing. The laughter quieted as they realized what she was doing. With quick, sure strokes, she turned the insults into equations. Every crude line became part of a larger proof. Letters became variables, drawings became graphs, curves became functions. Within minutes, the mockery had transformed into something entirely different, a flawless demonstration of symmetry and number theory. She dropped the chalk and stepped back, her voice steady. Math doesn't care about your jokes. It only cares about truth. The room was silent. Even Bradley had no immediate comeback. Whitmore entered just then, his eyes flicking over the board. He paused, his expression unreadable. For a brief second, Celine thought he might acknowledge her brilliance. But instead, his lips thinned. "Sit down," he said curtly. "We have work to do." And just like that, the moment was swallowed. The class moved on, but the silence that lingered was different this time. Not the silence of laughter, but of realization. For the rest of the day, whispers followed her again. But they carried a new edge. Not just ridicule, but fear. That night, when Celine returned to her dorm, she finally opened Jessica's notebook. Inside were pages of problems. Difficult ones, the kind that required patience and creativity. But in the margins, Jessica had written small notes. Try substitution here. Don't trust the obvious path. Look for symmetry. Celine closed the notebook slowly, her chest tightening. Maybe Marcus was right. Maybe allies could come from unexpected places. But even as that hope flickered, she couldn't shake the feeling of eyes watching her from the shadows, waiting for her next step. The storm was not coming. It was already here. Saturday morning arrived with a crisp chill, the kind that made the air feel sharp in Celine's lungs as she crossed Harvard Yard. She carried only her notebook and a sharpened pencil, tucked carefully into the pocket of her hoodie. Ahead, the old stone walls of the mathematics building glowed under the soft light of dawn, ivy crawling like veins across the surface. Today wasn't just another class. It was a test, a real one. Not an official competition, but a private session organized by Whitmore himself. He called it a diagnostic, but everyone knew what it really was, a spectacle. A chance to prove, in front of students and faculty alike, whether the janitor's daughter was a miracle or a mistake. Inside the lecture hall, the room buzzed with anticipation. Rows of students filled the seats, notebooks open, whispers flying. Bradley sat in the front row, posture perfect, as if preparing for a performance. Connor leaned back with his feet on the desk, already grinning at the thought of what might unfold. Jessica sat off to the side, her expression tight. She didn't look at Celine, but her fingers tapped restlessly against her notebook. Whitmore stood at the podium, his presence commanding. He didn't waste time. Today, he announced, we'll examine problem-solving under pressure. One student against the room. His eyes swept the hall before landing on Celine. Miss Jackson. To the board. A ripple of murmurs spread. Some gasped, others smirked. All eyes turned to her. Celine's heart pounded. She tightened her grip on the strap of her backpack, then walked slowly to the front. The wooden floor creaked under her small shoes, each step echoing louder than it should. Whitmore uncapped a marker and wrote across the massive whiteboard. Goldbach's conjecture. Gasps filled the hall. The problem was legendary, unsolved for nearly 3 centuries. Mathematicians had dedicated lifetimes to it and failed. It wasn't a homework question. It was an academic Everest. Bradley's voice rang out. You can't be serious. You're giving her that. Whitmore's smile was thin. If she is what some claim she is, let us see. Celine stared at the words. Her chest tightened, not from fear of the problem itself, but from the trap. No one could solve Goldbach's conjecture in an afternoon. Not even Terence Tao. Whitmore wasn't asking her to succeed. He was setting her up to fail in front of everyone. She turned to face the class. Dozens of eyes watched her, some eager to see her fall, some curious, a few quietly hopeful. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory. Baby, don't let them write your story for you. Celine picked up the marker. Instead of tackling the impossible head-on, she began to write something else. Not a full solution, but a framework, a way of approaching the conjecture differently. She broke it into smaller patterns, mapping out the symmetry of even numbers, tracing paths where others had seen only walls. Her strokes were fast, confident, but deliberate, as though she was sketching the outline of a new city. Whispers rose, then died as the room leaned in. Bradley frowned, trying to follow. Connor's grin slipped. Even Whitmore's smirk faltered as the structure grew across the board. It wasn't a complete solution, how could it be? But it was fresh. A new lens on an old riddle. She wasn't solving the unsolvable, but she was changing the way people looked at it. When she finally stepped back, the board was filled with patterns so clean and unexpected that even the skeptics were silent. Celine turned to face them. Her voice was quiet, but steady. I don't know if Goldbach's conjecture can ever be solved, but I do know we've been asking the wrong questions. The silence held. Then, from the back, a low voice spoke. She's not wrong. All heads turned. Professor Marcus had been leaning against the wall, arms crossed. Now he stepped forward, his eyes on the board. This is the kind of thinking we encourage in research. Not blind repetition of old attempts, but reimagining the path. She's showing you what it means to think differently. The students shifted uneasily. Some still looked unconvinced, but others, Jessica among them, nodded slowly. Whitmore's jaw tightened. Class dismissed. His voice cracked like a whip, sharp and abrupt. Chairs scraped, backpacks zipped, and the hall emptied quickly. Bradley stormed out without a glance back. Connor muttered something under his breath and followed. Jessica lingered near the doorway, watching Celine with something like respect. Celine stood by the board, marker still in her hand, her knees shaking now that the moment had passed. Marcus approached, lowering his voice. What you did today, they'll remember. Not because you solved it, but because you showed them you weren't afraid to try. Celine nodded slowly, though her chest still ached. She knew this wasn't victory. Not yet. But it was something more important. Survival. As she left the hall, the late afternoon sun spilled across the courtyard, painting the ivy-covered walls in warm gold. The light wrapped around her like a quiet promise. The storm was still raging, but she had taken her first step through it, and she hadn't been broken. The week after the Goldbach challenge, Celine became more than a rumor. She was a spark, and sparks at Harvard had a way of starting fires. Posters announcing the Putnam competition hung across the campus, bold red letters plastered over bulletin boards and student cafes. For most students, the Putnam was the ultimate academic test, a chance to prove themselves among the sharpest young mathematicians in the nation. For Celine, it represented something more. The first real battleground where she could show the world that her brilliance wasn't a fluke. But not everyone saw it that way. One evening, she sat in the library's quietest corner, the fading orange of sunset spilling over her open notebook. She was deep in thought, sketching patterns for prime distributions, when the chair across from her scraped suddenly. Bradley Sterling sat down uninvited, his blazer crisp, his smile sharp as glass. "You really don't get it, do you?" he said softly. Celine blinked, her pencil hovering mid-air. "Get what?" "That this place isn't about talent. It's about power." He leaned closer, his cologne faint but sharp. "And you don't have any. You're a showpiece. A distraction. And when you're no longer useful, they'll toss you aside." Celine's hand tightened around her pencil, but she stayed silent. Bradley smirked. "The Putnam is Harvard's pride. If you try to take that spotlight, you'll regret it." Before she could answer, Jessica appeared at the end of the aisle, her arms crossed, her eyes locked on Bradley. "Funny," she said coolly. "I thought Harvard was about solving problems, not scaring 10-year-olds. Bradley's smirk faltered, but only for a moment. He rose from his chair, straightening his blazer. "Enjoy the show while it lasts," he muttered before walking off. Jessica slid into the empty seat, her voice low. "Don't listen to him. He's terrified. That's why he's coming at you so hard." Celine's chest tightened. What if he's right? What if no matter what I do, they'll never let me win? Jessica studied her for a moment, then shrugged. "Then you don't play for their approval. You play for yourself." Her words lingered long after she left, echoing louder than the whispers Celine faced the next day in class. 2 days later, Whitmore called an emergency meeting of the Putnam team in the Grand Lecture Hall. Celine arrived early, her small figure swallowed by the cavernous space. The tall windows let in pale morning light, spilling over the chalkboard that stretched nearly the length of the room. As the other students filed in, the atmosphere was electric. Bradley and Connor whispered together, casting glances at her. Jessica sat apart, notebook already open, her pen tapping lightly against the page. Finally, Whitmore strode in, his expression harder than stone. He didn't waste time. "The administration has decided," he announced, "that this year's Putnam team will be selected by an internal trial. One problem. One solution. Winner takes the lead." His eyes flicked to Celine. "This will determine who represents Harvard." A murmur spread through the students. Normally, the team was chosen by faculty recommendation. An internal trial was unheard of. Bradley's grin widened. "Sounds fair to me," he said loudly, making sure Celine could hear. Whitmore continued. "The trial will take place tomorrow morning. No collaboration. No notes. Just you, the board, and the problem." Celine's heart pounded. She wasn't afraid of problems. Numbers had always been her friends, but she knew this wasn't just about math. It was about survival. As the meeting ended, she lingered behind, staring at the empty board. The room was silent now, the pale light stretching shadows across the floor. She imagined herself standing there tomorrow, chalk in hand, with every eye on her. Success meant stepping into history. Failure meant proving every insult right. Marcus entered quietly, his footsteps soft against the wood. "I heard," he said. Celine turned, her voice small. "It's a trap." "Yes," Marcus agreed. "But traps can be outsmarted." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "They'll expect you to panic. Don't give them that. Don't let the stage frighten you. Let the math carry you." Celine swallowed hard, nodding. But even as she tried to believe him, a knot twisted tighter in her stomach. That night, back in her dorm, she sat at her desk long after the campus had gone quiet. The moonlight filtered through the wide window, silvering the pages of her notebook. She scribbled equations furiously, chasing patterns, testing ideas, her pencil racing until her hand cramped. When exhaustion finally forced her to rest, she whispered to herself in the stillness, "Tomorrow I don't just solve a problem. I prove I belong." And as she drifted into sleep, she had no idea how much tomorrow would change everything. The morning of the trial dawned with skies the color of pewter. A light wind rattled the leaves across Harvard Yard, their dry edges skittering against stone paths. Celine walked beside her mother, Sarah Jackson, who had taken a rare morning off work to stand with her. "You don't have to prove anything to them," Sarah said softly, adjusting the strap of her worn canvas bag. "You've already proved it to yourself." Celine nodded, though her small fists stayed clenched at her sides. "I know. But if I don't do this, they'll never stop." Sarah stopped, crouching down so they were eye to eye. The early light softened her tired features, but her gaze was steady. "Then go in there and remind them who you are. Not the janitor's daughter. Not their photo op. You. Celine Jackson." Celine swallowed the lump in her throat, hugged her mother tightly, and stepped into the math building. The lecture hall was already packed. Students filled the rows, notebooks ready to record what would surely become campus legend. Professors lined the back wall, arms folded, faces unreadable. Bradley sat tall in the front row, his posture stiff, his jaw set. Connor lounged beside him, twirling a pen like it was all a game. Jessica sat apart again, but her eyes flicked toward Celine with a glint of something almost protective. Whitmore presided at the podium, chalk in hand. He turned to the massive board and scrawled the problem with deliberate strokes. "Prove or disprove the convergence of the following series." Gasps rose from the students. It was no ordinary challenge. It wasn't unsolved like Goldbox, but it was wicked, something meant to consume hours, maybe days, of careful thought. And now, one girl was being asked to tackle it under the weight of an entire institution. "Miss Jackson," Whitmore said, his voice edged with triumph, "the board is yours." Celine walked to the front. Her small frame looked even smaller under the towering chalkboard. For a moment, the whispers grew louder, a tide of doubt rolling through the hall. She took the chalk. It felt heavy in her hand. Her chest tightened, her mind threatening to scatter under the pressure. Then she closed her eyes. Breathe in. Breathe out. Numbers don't laugh. Numbers don't lie. She turned to the board and began. At first, the strokes were hesitant. A line here, an equation there. Bradley smirked, whispering something to Connor. But then the rhythm came, her rhythm. Patterns emerged. What seemed like chaos snapped into place. She moved faster, chalk dust smudging her fingers, her braids swaying slightly as she leaned into the work. The hall quieted. Even Bradley stopped smirking as the proof stretched across the board, layer after layer of elegant reasoning. Connor's pen stilled in his hand. Jessica leaned forward, her lips parted. Minutes passed. The board filled. And then, silence again, but different this time. The silence of something undeniable. Celine dropped the chalk, her small hand trembling not from fear but from adrenaline. She turned to face them. "It converges," she said simply. "And here's why." The room held its breath. Professor Whitmore stepped forward, his eyes darting over the board. His face twitched, his lips pressing together. He searched for an error, a crack, anything to tear her down with. But the logic held. Every line, every step airtight. Finally, a voice broke the silence. Not Whitmore's, but another professor from the back. "She's right." Another spoke up. "Not just right. This approach is remarkable. Murmurs spread like fire. Students leaned closer, eyes wide. Some scribbled notes furiously, others just stared. Bradley's face flushed crimson. He shot to his feet. She had help. No one that age could. "Sit down, Sterling," Whitmore snapped, though his voice trembled with the effort. Celine's gaze swept the room. She saw disbelief, awe, resentment. But most of all, she saw cracks forming in the wall that had been built against her. For the first time, Harvard had been forced to acknowledge her not as a novelty, but as a mathematician. As the hall slowly emptied, Marcus approached her. His smile was small but steady. "That," he said quietly, "was the moment the tide turned." Celine looked back at the board, the proof stretching like a map of her own resilience. She felt the truth of his words. Something had shifted. Not victory, not yet, but momentum. When she left the hall, the morning sun had broken through the gray clouds. Light spilled across the campus, washing over the old brick buildings and the students still buzzing with what they had just witnessed. For the first time since arriving at Harvard, Celine felt the storm bending. Not disappearing, but bending, in her favor. Celine just faced Harvard's first real trial by fire and walked away stronger than ever. But her challenges are only beginning. The sabotage will grow darker, the stakes higher, and her genius will be tested in ways no one expects. If you're inspired by her resilience, don't forget to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to this channel. Your support is all we need to keep on bringing stories like this to life. The days after the trial were unlike anything Celine had experienced before. Everywhere she went, whispers followed. In the dining hall, in the library, even on the walkways between buildings, her name lingered in the air. Some whispers carried awe, others bitterness, but all of them carried weight. She had gone from invisible to unavoidable. And with that visibility came a new kind of danger. She first noticed it in small ways. A missing page from her notebook, though she was certain she hadn't torn it out. Chalk left broken at her desk before class. Her equations smudged mysteriously on the board whenever she left the room for even a minute. At first, she brushed it off. Harvard was intense, competitive. Maybe this was normal. But by the end of the week, the pattern became clear. This wasn't coincidence. It was sabotage. One evening, as twilight painted the sky in streaks of rose and violet, Celine sat in the library's farthest wing. The tall arched windows let in the last of the light, spilling gently across the oak table where she worked. She was deep into a series of number theory problems, her pencil moving fast, when a shadow fell across her desk. Bradley Sterling stood there, Connor smirking at his side. "Burning the midnight oil, mascot?" Bradley's voice carried, though the library rules demanded silence. "Trying to get ahead before the real test?" Celine didn't look up. She kept writing. Bradley's hand shot out, slamming her notebook closed. "I'm talking to you." Her heart pounded, but she met his eyes. "I don't need to listen." Connor snorted. Big words for someone who doesn't even belong here. Bradley leaned closer, his voice dropping. "You think one lucky board performance makes you one of us? It doesn't. You're still just the janitor's daughter. And this place doesn't bend for people like you." Before Celine could reply, Jessica's voice cut through the aisle. "Funny, because from where I'm standing, it looks like she's already bending it." Bradley's jaw tightened. He glanced at Jessica, then back at Celine. "This isn't over." He shoved the notebook toward her and stalked off, Connor trailing behind. Jessica stepped closer, her tone softer. "They're getting desperate. Don't let them rattle you." Celine opened her notebook again, relief flooding her chest when she saw the pages were intact. But she knew Jessica was right. Bradley wasn't giving up. He was escalating. The escalation came faster than she expected. 2 mornings later, Celine walked into class and froze. Her desk was soaked. Coffee had been spilled across it, seeping into the wood, dripping onto the floor. Her papers, weeks of work, were ruined, the ink bleeding into unreadable stains. Gasps filled the room. A few students whispered, others laughed nervously. Celine stood rooted to the spot, her chest hollow. The proofs she had been building, the delicate structures she had poured into those pages, gone in an instant. Bradley lounged in his chair nearby, his smirk sharper than ever. Connor chuckled, pretending to cover it with a cough. Whitmore entered moments later, took one look at the mess and shrugged. Accidents happen. Sit somewhere else, Miss Jackson. Her throat tightened. She wanted to scream, to tell him it wasn't an accident. But the words caught in her chest. She gathered the ruined pages, her hands shaking, the ink smearing across her palms. Jessica rose halfway from her seat as if to speak, but stopped when Whitmore's glare swept across the room. Celine moved to the back row, her vision blurring. She sat in silence as the lecture began, her notebook empty, her work destroyed. But even through the sting of tears, a thought formed, clear, sharp, and fierce. They can spill coffee. They can tear my papers. But they can't take what's in my mind. She clenched her pencil tighter and began again on a blank page, numbers flowing like defiance across the paper. Her proofs would not be erased. Not this time. Not ever. Celine spent the rest of that day rebuilding her work from memory. Her notebook, though stained and warped, was filled with fresh pages by evening. She worked in the library, sunlight fading into the warm glow of desk lamps, her pencil scratching steadily across the paper. But the damage had been done. Word spread quickly, about the coffee, about her ruined notes, about Whitmore's dismissive response. Some students whispered that she would crack under the pressure, that no child could withstand this kind of hostility. Others, quietly, cautiously, began to root for her. By the time the weekend arrived, the tension on campus had reached a breaking point. Everyone was waiting to see whether Celine would fold, or fight back. On Saturday morning, the Putnam team gathered in the library for another practice. The tall windows let in pale light, spilling across the long oak tables where students spread their papers. Celine arrived early, clutching a new notebook. She chose a seat by the window, the sunlight falling over her desk like a shield. When the others trickled in, Bradley and Connor made their entrance last. Bradley carried a steaming cup of coffee, holding it carelessly close to her desk. Connor chuckled as he leaned in. "Careful," he said, his voice low and mocking. "You wouldn't want another accident." The room went silent. All eyes turned to Celine. Some expected her to shrink back. Others waited for her to lash out. Instead, she stood. Her small hands trembled slightly, but her voice was steady. "You can spill coffee. You can tear my papers. But you can't erase what's in my head." She tapped her temple lightly. "You can't erase me." Her words echoed in the stillness. For the first time, Bradley had no quick comeback. Jessica broke the silence. She stood, pushing her chair back with a scrape. "She's right. You can't break her. And honestly, I'm tired of watching you try." She turned to Celine, her voice firm. "If you ever want a study partner, I'm in." A ripple moved through the room. Some students looked shocked, others thoughtful. Even Connor's smirk faltered. Bradley's face flushed red, but before he could respond, Professor Marcus entered. His gaze swept the room, sharp and knowing. He didn't need to ask what had happened. He could feel the tension, see the looks on their faces. "Sit down," Marcus said evenly. "If you're here for games, leave. If you're here for math, then let's begin." Bradley slumped into his chair, his jaw tight. Connor muttered something under his breath, but stayed quiet. Celine sat too, her hands still shaking, but this time from adrenaline, not fear. For the first time since arriving at Harvard, she felt the balance shift, just slightly in her favor. That night in her dorm, she opened her new notebook. Moonlight poured through the wide window, silvering the fresh pages. She began again, line after line of numbers flowing like water. Her proofs rebuilt themselves, stronger and cleaner than before. The sabotage had hurt. It had humiliated her. But it had also pushed her further than she thought she could go. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory. "Baby, when they try to break you, that's when you're closest to your breakthrough." Celine smiled faintly. The storm was still raging. But now she was learning how to walk straight through it. Winter settled over Harvard with a quiet heaviness. Snow blanketed the yard, softening the stone paths, muffling the usual hum of voices. Inside the mathematics building, warmth came not from heaters but from the golden spill of sunlight through high windows, pooling across desks stacked with notebooks and coffee cups. Celine sat by the window in the study room, her pencil racing across a page. She was sketching a new approach to prime gaps, her thoughts sharper than ever since the sabotage. The incident with the coffee had left scars, but it had also carved out a fire inside her. Every number she wrote was an act of defiance. Across the room, Jessica worked quietly at another desk. They didn't talk much in public, but there was an unspoken truce between them now. Sometimes Jessica would slide her notebook over, pointing to a stuck calculation. Other times, Celine would circle an overlooked symmetry in Jessica's work. Their alliance was fragile, but real. Bradley and Connor still watched her like hawks, their whispers sharp as knives, but something had shifted. Their confidence wasn't absolute anymore. That morning, Professor Marcus entered carrying a slim folder. His face was unreadable, though his eyes flicked toward Celine. He set the folder on the table. "I want to show you something," he said to the group. This came in from a visiting professor. He spread the papers across the table. They weren't practice problems. They were fragments, unfinished attempts at proofs, hints of new frameworks. The kind of work usually kept private among advanced researchers. "This," Marcus continued, "was sent with a note. Someone heard about what happened in this department, and they asked if one of our students might attempt a new approach." His gaze rested on Celine. Specifically, they asked for her. The room went still. Jessica's eyes widened. Connor scoffed loudly. Bradley's jaw clenched, his knuckles whitening around his pencil. Celine's heart hammered. Who sent it? Marcus hesitated, then said the name quietly. Professor Terence Tao. The silence broke into whispers. Tao wasn't just a mathematician. He was a living legend, a Fields medalist, someone whose name carried weight in every corner of academia. Celine's breath caught. She had written to him once before, years ago, as a child desperate for guidance. She never imagined he remembered her, let alone that he would seek her out now. Bradley shot to his feet. "This is absurd. She's 10 years old." Tao wouldn't waste his time on. He stopped himself, but the contempt in his voice hung heavy in the air. Marcus raised a hand. He didn't waste his time. He sent this because he believed she might see something the rest of us have missed. Jessica leaned forward, studying the pages. "What kind of framework is this?" Marcus tapped the margin where Tao's neat handwriting left a question mark. "It's an unfinished approach to additive number theory. A new angle on an old problem. He wants to know if Celine sees a path forward." All eyes turned to her. Celine's hands trembled as she reached for the papers. The symbols were dense, layered, beautiful in their incompleteness. She scanned line after line, her mind sparking. Patterns leapt at her. hints of symmetry hidden beneath the surface. I think. Her voice faltered. She swallowed and tried again. I think I can see where it might go. Bradley laughed bitterly. Of course you do. But Jessica leaned closer. Show us. Celine pulled her notebook closer, her pencil moving fast. She traced Tao's outline, then added her own strokes, building bridges where gaps had been left. Slowly, the fragments began to connect. Not a full solution, but a clearer path, like a trail through fog. Marcus watched, his face unreadable but his eyes shining faintly. When Celine finally set down her pencil, the page was filled with equations that hummed with possibility. The room was silent, every eye fixed on the notebook. Jessica whispered, That actually makes sense." Bradley's face was pale, his smirk gone. Connor muttered, "This is ridiculous," but his voice lacked conviction. Marcus leaned forward, his voice quiet but firm. "Celine, what you just did, this isn't practice anymore. This is research. Real research. And Tao asked you personally to attempt it." Celine's breath came fast. She had wanted to prove she belonged at Harvard, but this was something larger. This was recognition beyond the campus walls. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory. "Baby, your gift isn't just for you. It's for the world." And for the first time, Celine began to believe it. News of Tao's request spread across Harvard like wildfire. By the end of the week, it wasn't just whispers in the library or chatter in the dining hall. Faculty were talking in hushed tones, students craned their necks in corridors, and even professors who had dismissed her began sneaking glances when Celine entered a room. The idea that Terence Tao, the most respected mathematician of their time, had specifically asked for her was almost too much for them to bear. Whitmore, more than anyone, bristled at the news. His lectures grew sharper, his comments colder. He rarely used her name, calling her the child or the experiment. He pushed the class harder, assigning near-impossible sets, always glancing her way as if daring her to fail. Celine endured it quietly, though her hands sometimes trembled when she picked up the chalk. Not from fear, but from the pressure of expectation. Bradley and Connor grew restless too. One afternoon, as she left the building, Bradley blocked her path under the archway, his voice low and venomous. "You think one email makes you a prodigy? Tao's just humoring you. He'll forget your name in a month." Celine's eyes met his, calm but steady. "Maybe. But I won't forget what I can do." For once, Bradley had no reply. The real shock came a week later. It was a Tuesday morning when Marcus entered class carrying a folded letter. His expression was grave, but his eyes held a spark. He handed the paper to Whitmore, who read it with lips pressed so thin they were almost invisible. "This is absurd," Whitmore muttered, but his voice shook. "What is it?" A student called from the back. Marcus turned to the class. "Professor Tao is visiting Harvard next month. He's requested to meet with Miss Jackson, and to observe her work." The room erupted. Gasps, whispers, disbelief. Connor dropped his pen with a clatter. Jessica's eyes widened. Bradley's fists clenched tight on the desk. Whitmore slammed the letter onto the podium. "This is not how academia works. We do not bypass process for spectacle." But no one was listening. The tide had shifted. Celine sat frozen in her chair, her heart pounding. Tao wasn't just sending her puzzles anymore. He was coming here. To her. That evening, she sat in her dorm by the wide window. Moonlight poured in, turning the pages of her notebook silver. Her pencil hovered above the paper, but for once she couldn't write. The weight of what lay ahead pressed too heavily. Her mother's voice rang through her memory, steady as a heartbeat. "When the world finally looks at you, don't hide. Let them see." Celine closed her eyes, breathing slowly. She wasn't just solving problems anymore. She was stepping onto a stage much larger than she had imagined. The storm around her had grown into something vast and global. But somewhere deep inside, she knew she was ready. Snow had piled high along the edges of Harvard Yard, muffling footsteps and quieting the usual rush of students. Yet inside the mathematics building, silence was rare. Ever since the announcement of Terence Tao's upcoming visit, the atmosphere had been electric. Half excitement, half dread. Celine felt it every time she walked down a hallway. Heads turned, whispers followed, notebooks clutched tighter. She was no longer just the girl who solved one impossible problem. She was now the girl who might change the way the world thought about math. And not everyone liked that. It began with the little things. Her locker jammed twice in 1 week, though it had never given her trouble before. Her problem sets disappeared from her desk, only to reappear later in odd places. Under stacks of books, even in a trash bin outside the building. Each incident left her shaken, though she tried not to show it. Jessica noticed. One evening after practice, as they walked across the courtyard, Jessica's breath came out in white clouds against the freezing air. "They're not going to stop," she said. "Not until you either break or win." Celine pulled her coat tighter. "I don't want to fight them. I just want to do the math." Jessica gave a short laugh, sharp but not unkind. At Harvard, those two are the same thing. The next day, Whitmore called another special session. His voice was clipped, his eyes colder than the winter wind. "Since Professor Tao's visit has apparently made this department a circus," he said, "we'll raise the standard. If you want to be considered serious mathematicians, any of you will compete in teams. But Jackson," his eyes pinned her in place, "you'll compete alone." Gasps rippled through the room. Bradley's smirk spread wide. Connor chuckled, already scribbling a mocking note in the margin of his paper. Jessica's chair scraped against the floor. "That's not fair." Whitmore's glare silenced her. "Life isn't fair. Excellence is measured by results, not excuses." Celine felt every gaze on her, sharp as glass. Her stomach twisted, but she forced her voice steady. "Fine." Whitmore's lips curled into something between a smile and a sneer. "Then let's begin." The problems were brutal. Whole teams hunched together, whispering furiously, papers piling in chaotic stacks. Celine sat alone at her desk, her pencil moving steadily. Her small figure looked swallowed by the room, but her focus was unshakable. She worked quickly but carefully, weaving connections others missed. What looked like separate puzzles revealed themselves to be part of the same larger structure. Time slipped away. When Whitmore finally called for pencils down, the team's papers were messy, unfinished, scratched with desperate attempts. Celine's was clean. Precise. Every problem solved. Whitmore flipped through her pages, his expression tightening with each one. The murmurs in the room grew louder. Even Bradley leaned forward, disbelief clouding his smirk. Finally, Whitmore dropped the papers onto his desk. "Dismissed." His voice was curt, but it couldn't erase what everyone had seen. As the students filed out, Jessica caught Celine's arm. "You didn't just keep up. You crushed them. Alone." Celine shook her head. "It doesn't matter. He'll never admit it." Jessica's eyes narrowed. "He won't have to. Everyone else already knows." That night, Harvard's math community buzzed with the story. Students from other departments whispered about the trial in dining halls, in dormitories, even in cafes across Cambridge. Celine sat by her dorm window, watching snowflakes drift through the silver light of the moon. She opened her notebook, her pencil poised. But for once, she didn't write. She thought instead about Marcus's words, about Jessica's unexpected loyalty, about her mother's quiet strength. She thought about Tao, whose arrival now loomed larger than ever. Her world was changing faster than she could process. What began as survival in one classroom was now becoming a fight for something much bigger, something that could no longer be contained by Harvard's walls. And though she didn't know it yet, the storm that had been gathering was about to unleash itself in ways no one could ignore. The storm broke on a Thursday. Celine arrived at class to find the board already covered in scrawled words. Mascot. Quota. Janitor's girl. The handwriting was messy, angry, rushed. Laughter rippled through the room as she froze in the doorway. Bradley leaned against the wall, arms folded. Guess your fan club's growing. Whitmore entered seconds later, saw the board, and made no move to erase it. His voice was cold. Take your seat, Miss Jackson. We don't have time for distractions. Her fists clenched at her sides, but she walked forward, ignoring the sting in her chest. She picked up the chalk, wiped away the slurs, and began writing equations over them. She didn't explain, didn't look at anyone. Line by line, insult by insult, she buried their cruelty under math. The room grew quiet, the laughter evaporating. When she finally sat down, her heart was pounding, but her face was calm. She refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. After class, Marcus found her outside, standing beneath the bare branches where snow clung to the limbs. Her notebook was clutched tight against her chest. You don't have to carry this alone, he said gently. Celine shook her head. They'll never stop. Maybe not, Marcus admitted. But the more they push, the more people notice who you really are. Today, you didn't just solve problems. You silenced a room. Her eyes stung, but she nodded. That evening, she returned to her dorm to find Jessica waiting by her door, arms crossed, her expression tight. They've gone too far, Jessica said flatly. Whitmore, Bradley, all of them. It's disgusting. Celine unlocked the door quietly. It doesn't matter. They'll just find another way. Jessica followed her inside. Then we don't give them the chance. You and me, we study together. We show up together. They want you to feel small, but the more people who stand with you, the harder it gets for them to win. Celine stared at her. Why are you helping me? Jessica hesitated, then said, Because I'm tired of pretending I don't see what's happening. And because... She looked down. Because you're better than all of us. And I want to learn from you. The words landed heavy in the quiet room. For the first time, Celine realized that what she was building wasn't just survival. It was influence. She wasn't only fighting for herself. She was changing the people around her. But even as new allies formed, the opposition doubled down. The very next day, Celine was summoned to the dean's office. The room was large, lined with shelves of leather-bound books, the winter sunlight cutting across the carpet. Dean Harrington sat behind the desk, his face composed but distant. Beside him stood Professor Whitmore, arms folded. Miss Jackson, the dean began, concerns have been raised about irregularities in your recent work, accusations of outside assistance, possibly even plagiarism. The words hit like a physical blow. That's not true, she blurted. Whitmore's lips curled. Then you'll have no objection to a full review. Every paper, every notebook, every line of work. Celine's chest tightened. She had nothing to hide, but she knew this wasn't about truth. This was about breaking her. The dean's voice softened, though his eyes remained cold. In the meantime, until this review is complete, your participation in the Putnam team will be suspended. Her stomach dropped. Around campus, she had been building momentum. Now, with one stroke, they had cut her off. She walked out of the office in a daze, the cold air stinging her face. Students passed by, their chatter a blur. She clutched her notebook tighter, whispering to herself like a lifeline. They can strip away titles. They can smear my name. But they can't erase the math. And as the snow crunched beneath her small shoes, she knew this wasn't the end of the fight. It was only the beginning of something bigger. Celine has just been suspended from Harvard's Putnam team, targeted not by failure, but by fear of her brilliance. The storm around her is darker than ever, but so is her determination to fight back. If you've been gripped by her journey so far, don't forget to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to support this channel. Snow kept falling over Cambridge, blanketing Harvard in silence. But inside the mathematics building, silence was nowhere to be found. The rumor had spread like fire. Celine Jackson had cheated. By the end of the week, it wasn't just whispers in the halls. Flyers appeared on bulletin boards. Anonymous posts littered student forums. Some claimed she had stolen work from graduate students. Others insisted Terence Tao's interest proved nothing. She must have had help. Everywhere she walked, eyes followed her. Some looked pitying. Others, sharp with suspicion. A few, openly hostile. When she entered class, the whispers didn't stop. Pages rustled louder. Pens tapped deliberately. Bradley's smirk was wider than ever. Connor laughing freely now that the tide seemed to have turned. Whitmore didn't hide his satisfaction either. He paced at the front of the room, speaking about integrity and academic honesty in a voice dripping with implication. Harvard has no place for those who misrepresent themselves, he said, not once glancing her way, but making sure everyone else did. Celine sat stiff in her chair, her notebook closed. For the first time, numbers didn't feel safe. The equations on the page blurred as her vision burned. She wanted to fight back, to shout that it was a lie. But she also knew that in places like Harvard, lies could spread faster than truth, and sometimes louder. That evening she walked across the yard, snow crunching beneath her sneakers. The lamps glowed softly along the paths, but the world felt darker than ever. She pulled her coat tighter, her breath fogging in the cold air. She wanted to go home, to see her mother's warm smile, to hear her say it didn't matter what they thought. But she couldn't. If she left now, they would win. Still, the thought pressed against her chest like a weight. What if they've already won? Back in her dorm, her notebook lay open on the desk. She stared at the blank page, pencil poised but unmoving. Normally, the numbers came like friends eager to be heard. Tonight, they refused. The silence pressed in until she thought she couldn't breathe. A soft knock broke through. Jessica stood at the door, her expression uncertain. She stepped inside, closing it behind her. For a long moment neither spoke. Then Jessica said quietly, "It's bad out there." Celine's voice cracked. "They think I cheated." Jessica shook her head. "I don't. And Marcus doesn't. And Tao definitely doesn't." Celine let out a shaky breath. But what if none of that matters? What if Harvard doesn't care about the truth? Jessica's face tightened. Then you show them something they can't ignore. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Celine, you've already done more at 10 years old than most of us dream about. Don't let their lies be the end of your story." The words sank deep, but the despair didn't lift. Not yet. The next day, Marcus found her sitting alone in the library. The tall windows let in pale winter light, casting long shadows over her desk. "You've heard the rumors," she said without looking up. "I have," he admitted. "And?" Her voice was small. "And I know the truth," Marcus replied. "And so do you. Don't mistake their noise for evidence." Celine's eyes stung. But what if the dean doesn't care about the truth? Marcus was silent for a moment, then said, "Sometimes institutions fail. People fail. But math doesn't. Keep working. Because sooner or later, the truth will outshine every lie." That night, Celine sat by her window as snowflakes drifted through the lamplight outside. She opened her notebook again. Slowly, shakily, she began to write. At first, the numbers came reluctantly. Then, like a river breaking free of ice, they flowed. Patterns unfolded, equations connected, and for the first time in days, she felt her mind clear. She realized something. The rumors, the slurs, the lies, they couldn't touch the math itself. Her proofs were still hers. Her ideas were still hers. And no one could steal them from her unless she stopped writing. Her pencil pressed harder, faster, until the page was full. She sat back, breathless. The storm outside still raged, but inside something had shifted. She wasn't broken. Not yet. The storm of rumors finally reached its peak. By Monday, the dean called Celine back to his office. The heavy oak doors shut behind her with a thud that seemed to echo forever. The room was dim but lined with tall windows that let in pale morning light, cutting stripes across the carpet. Dean Harrington sat behind his desk, glasses perched low on his nose. Beside him stood Whitmore, his arms folded tightly, his expression carved from stone. "Miss Jackson," the dean began, "this university takes allegations of misconduct very seriously. We have reviewed claims that your recent work was not independently produced." Celine's chest tightened. "That's not true. Every line was mine." Whitmore's voice was sharp. "Convenient words. But talent alone does not explain how a child solves problems that stump graduate students." Her fists clenched. "I studied. I worked. I didn't cheat." The dean leaned back, sighing as though the matter pained him. "Until the investigation concludes, your access to department resources will be restricted. No competitions. No research groups. No formal recognition." It felt like the floor fell out beneath her. All the progress she had clawed for, all the small victories against doubt and sabotage, stripped away in a single sentence. She walked out of the office numb, the corridor spinning around her. Students stared as she passed, some with pity, others with smug satisfaction. Bradley's smirk when she met his eyes told her everything. He thought he had won. That evening she sat on the edge of her dorm bed, notebook open but untouched. The pages blurred through her tears. For the first time, she wondered if maybe she couldn't do it, if maybe Harvard was too heavy, too cruel, too impossible. Her mother's voice rang in her memory. "Don't let them decide who you are. You show them." But how could she show them when they had silenced her? A knock interrupted her spiraling thoughts. Jessica stepped inside, followed by Marcus. Their faces were serious, but not hopeless. "You're not done," Marcus said firmly. "They've cut me off," Celine whispered. Marcus shook his head. "They can cut you from their team. They can lock you out of their halls. But they can't lock your mind. Keep working. Keep building. When Tao arrives, let your work speak louder than their lies." Jessica dropped a folder on the desk. "I copied the problems from today's session. Do them. Not for Whitmore. Not for the dean. For you." Celine looked between them, her throat tight. For days, she had felt cornered, her back against the wall. But now, a flicker of something stirred again. If they wanted her silent, she would speak with math. If they wanted her gone, she would stay. If they wanted her erased, she would write her name into proofs they couldn't ignore. She picked up her pencil. The storm wasn't over. In fact, it was at its worst. But for the first time since the rumors began, Celine wasn't just surviving it. She was fighting through it. And somewhere deep inside she knew the moment of truth was coming. The day of Tao's visit arrived with skies so clear they seemed scrubbed clean by winter winds. The air was sharp, every breath cutting cold against Celine's lungs as she crossed the yard. Snow crunched beneath her sneakers, each step pulling her closer to the moment she had both dreaded and dreamed of. The math department was packed like never before. Professors filled the back rows, graduate students crammed shoulder to shoulder, undergraduates squeezed into aisles. Cameras weren't allowed, but whispers promised the story would spill far beyond these walls before the day was over. At the front of the hall stood Terence Tao, calm and unreadable, his presence radiating a quiet authority. He wasn't here to flatter Harvard. He wasn't here to humor anyone. He was here to see the truth. Celine sat in the second row, her notebook balanced on her knees. Her hands trembled, but not from fear alone. It was the weight of the moment. Every insult, every whisper, every attempt to erase her. It all led here. Whitmore strode to the podium, his voice smooth but edged with steel. Today we welcome Professor Tao. We will present a series of advanced problems. Our students will attempt them under his observation. This will demonstrate the integrity of our program. His eyes flicked briefly to Celine, and the claims made about certain individuals. The message was clear. Today wasn't just a test. It was a verdict. The first problems were given to the teams. Bradley, Connor, and the others huddled together, whispering furiously, their pencils scratching across pages. Their faces were tight with concentration, pride on the line. Then Tao's voice cut through the room, calm but decisive. I would like to see Miss Jackson work at the board. The words fell like a hammer. Gasps rippled through the hall. Whitmore stiffened, his jaw tight, but he couldn't refuse. Not here. Not in front of Tao. Very well, Whitmore said curtly. Miss Jackson, the board is yours. Celine rose slowly. Her legs felt heavy, but her steps were steady. She reached the chalkboard, its vast surface stretching above her. She picked up the chalk, the white dust cool against her fingers. Tao handed her the problem himself. It wasn't a trick, not like Whitmore's traps. It was real, dense, layered, something only the bold would attempt in public. She studied it for a moment, her breath slow and deliberate. Then she began. At first, her strokes were tentative, the weight of the room pressing down on her. Bradley smirked, Connor whispered, Whitmore's arms folded tight. But as the lines grew, so did her confidence. Patterns emerged. Equations unfolded into symmetry. Symmetry into clarity. What seemed impossible began to take shape. Her hand moved faster, chalk snapping once, then twice, replaced each time without pause. The room grew silent. Even Bradley leaned forward, his smirk fading. Jessica's eyes widened, her pencil frozen above her notebook. Celine stepped back at last, the board covered in an elegant web of proof. It's not finished, she said softly. But it's the beginning of a new path. For a moment, silence reigned. Then Tao stepped forward. He studied the board line by line, his expression unreadable. Minutes passed like hours. The entire hall seemed to hold its breath. Finally, Tao turned to face the room. His voice was calm, but it carried the weight of authority. She's right. This is not just a solution. It's a new framework. One I believe will influence how we approach this problem for years to come. The silence broke. Gasps, murmurs, disbelief. Professors exchanged glances, some wide-eyed, some pale. Graduate students scribbled notes furiously. Bradley's face drained of color. Connor slumped in his chair. Whitmore's jaw worked soundlessly, his control slipping. And Celine stood there, chalk still in hand, the weight of the moment pressing in. She wasn't erased. She wasn't silenced. She wasn't the janitor's daughter or a quota or a mascot. She was a mathematician, and the whole world had just seen it. The silence after Tao's words stretched like a held breath. Then, like a dam breaking, the room erupted. Whispers collided, notebooks flipped open, pens scratched furiously. Students craned forward to copy the framework before it was erased. Professors leaned toward each other, muttering with urgency. Celine stood frozen at the board, her small frame dwarfed by the sea of reactions. She felt exposed, but not in the way she used to. This time, it wasn't ridicule or suspicion that weighed on her. It was awe. Impossible. A graduate student muttered near the back. She's 10 years old. Not impossible, Tao corrected gently. Just undeniable. The words struck like thunder. Whitmore moved quickly, his voice sharp. With all due respect, Professor Tao, this is reckless. One performance does not prove. Tao turned, his calm gaze silencing him. This is not performance. This is vision. I know what I am looking at. And so do you. Whitmore's mouth opened, then shut again. The color drained from his face. For the first time, his authority faltered. Bradley leapt to his feet, desperation cracking his voice. She cheated. She had help. There's no way. But Jessica's voice cut through, clear and steady. No. She did it. We all saw it. You're just angry because you couldn't. Gasps rippled through the room. Bradley's face flushed scarlet, his fists clenching at his sides. Connor muttered something under his breath, but no one laughed with him this time. For once, the tide wasn't on their side. Celine's chest rose and fell, her breath shallow. The fear, the doubt, the endless weight of proving herself, it all seemed to lift, piece by piece. She looked out at the room, at the faces turned toward her not with ridicule, but with respect. Her mother's words echoed in her mind. Baby, when the world finally looks at you, don't hide. Let them see. And they were seeing. Marcus stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. Today, history was made in this room. Not by privilege. Not by legacy. But by brilliance. His gaze swept across the students, landing on Bradley, on Connor, on Whitmore. And no amount of sabotage can erase that. The words hung in the air, sharp and final. When the session ended, students poured out buzzing with energy. Some avoided her eyes, still clinging to their pride. Others lingered, shy but curious, offering small nods of acknowledgement. Jessica walked beside her as they left the hall, the winter sunlight streaming through the tall windows. You realize what you just did, right? She said quietly. Celine hugged her notebook to her chest. I didn't solve it all. No, Jessica said, a faint smile tugging at her lips. You did something bigger. You changed how people see it. And how they see you. For the first time, Celine allowed herself to smile. Not wide, not loud. Just a quiet curve of her lips that carried more power than she had ever known. That night, back in her dorm, she sat at her desk under the silver wash of moonlight. Her notebook lay open, filled with the framework she had built in front of the world. She picked up her pencil, her hand steady. There was still so much to do. Problems unsolved, questions unanswered. But now she knew she didn't walk alone. The storm hadn't ended. But she had walked through its heart and come out standing. And nothing, no rumor, no sabotage, no lie, could take that away. Celine just stood at the board before Harvard's finest, and even Terence Tao, and proved her brilliance for the whole world to see. But the battle isn't finished yet. The reckoning is coming, and those who tried to erase her will have to face the truth. If this moment gave you chills, don't forget to like this video and share your thoughts in the comments. Celine Jackson's journey has taken a new turn. The morning after Tao's visit, Harvard's campus felt different. The air seemed lighter, conversations sharper, every corridor alive with the weight of what had just happened. For once, the whispers that followed Celine weren't laced with mockery or suspicion. They carried something else: curiosity, respect, even awe. She walked through the yard with her notebook pressed against her chest, snow crunching beneath her steps. Students glanced at her as she passed. Some quickly looked away, unwilling to admit what they felt. Others gave her small nods, hesitant but real acknowledgments. For months she had fought to be seen. Now she couldn't escape it. But recognition didn't erase the wreckage. By midweek, news of the session with Tao had spread beyond campus. Articles popped up in academic circles. Forums buzzed with heated debate. Some praised her as a prodigy. Others demanded explanations. And inside Harvard, the administration could no longer ignore the storm. Dean Harrington convened an emergency meeting in the faculty hall. The room was grand, wood-paneled, sunlight streaming through high windows. Professors filled the seats, their murmurs low and uneasy. At the front sat Whitmore, stiff-backed and stone-faced, while Marcus stood nearby, calm but resolute. Celine sat with her mother, Sarah, who had been invited at Marcus's insistence. Sarah's hand rested on her daughter's shoulder, steadying her as the room buzzed with tension. The dean's voice was heavy when he spoke. The events of last week have brought both pride and controversy to this institution. We must address the accusations, the treatment of students, and the conduct of faculty. Eyes shifted toward Whitmore. His jaw clenched, but he spoke quickly. This has gone too far. One demonstration does not change the fact that this child was admitted under questionable circumstances. The scrutiny was justified. Scrutiny is not sabotage, Marcus interrupted, his voice sharp. And what happened to Celine was not guidance. It was cruelty. We all know it. A murmur rippled through the room. Some professors nodded, others shifted uncomfortably. Sarah rose then, her voice quiet but strong. My daughter has worked for everything she's achieved. She's endured ridicule, hostility, and lies, all because she dared to be brilliant in a place that told her she didn't belong. If Harvard cannot recognize that brilliance, then perhaps Harvard doesn't deserve it. The words struck the hall like a bell. Bradley's father, Sterling Sr., had been invited too, his influence too large to ignore. He stood, his suit immaculate, his voice booming. Let's not pretend this is about fairness. This is about prestige. Harvard's name carries weight because of families like mine. If this child remains, I will reconsider my support. The threat hung heavy. All eyes turned to Bradley. For months, he had been her loudest enemy, his cruelty sharpened by entitlement. But now, with every gaze on him, something shifted. His face was pale, his voice unsteady when he finally spoke. No. The room stilled. Bradley's father narrowed his eyes. What did you say? Bradley swallowed hard. I said no. I won't be part of this anymore. She deserves to be here. More than I do. Gasps filled the room. Sterling Sr.'s face darkened, his hand tightening into a fist. But Bradley didn't flinch. For the first time, his defiance wasn't aimed at Celine. It was aimed at the system that had always shielded him. Whitmore's face twisted. This is outrageous. But Tao's voice cut through from where he sat quietly at the back. He hadn't spoken until now, but when he did, the hall fell silent. What's outrageous, Tao said evenly, is that a 10-year-old has shown more integrity, resilience, and brilliance than many of the adults in this room. Harvard must decide what kind of institution it wants to be. One that fears genius, or one that fosters it. The silence that followed was absolute. Celine sat very still, her small hands folded over her notebook. For the first time since arriving at Harvard, she felt the weight shift fully, not just in her favor, but toward something bigger. This wasn't only her fight anymore. This was about what Harvard would choose to become. And whatever they decided, she knew her path was clear. Her gift wasn't just survival or even triumph. It was transformation. The hall erupted in debate after Tao's words. But the momentum had shifted. Professors who once looked away now spoke with uneasy conviction. Students who had been silent began to nod, their whispers swelling into something larger. Dean Harrington called for order, his gavel striking the table. His face was drawn, weary, but when he finally spoke, his tone was firm. Effective immediately, Professor Whitmore will step down from his position pending review of his conduct. Gasps filled the room. Whitmore's face blanched, rage flashing in his eyes, but the decision was final. For months, he had wielded his authority like a weapon. Now, stripped of it, he looked smaller than Celine had ever seen him. The dean continued, "Furthermore, the university formally apologizes to Miss Jackson for the prejudice, hostility, and sabotage she endured. Harvard will establish new protocols to ensure students, regardless of age, race, or background, receive the support they deserve." The words echoed across the hall, heavy and irrevocable. Sarah squeezed her daughter's hand, tears glistening in her eyes. "They finally see you," she whispered. Celine's throat tightened, but she managed a small nod. In the days that followed, the changes rippled outward. Whitmore disappeared from campus. Bradley kept his distance, no longer her tormentor, but something closer to an uneasy ally. Jessica stayed close, studying with her late into the night. And the rumors that once tried to crush her? They vanished, replaced by headlines. Harvard prodigy stuns with new framework. Terence Tao praises 10-year-old mathematician. Celine's name traveled farther than Harvard's gates, into academic journals, into conferences, into the very heart of the global math community. But she didn't let it stop there. One quiet evening, she sat in the library, the golden lamplight soft against the stacks of books. Her notebook lay open, not with equations this time, but with plans. She called it the Jackson Mathematics Initiative, a program for children like her. Brilliant, overlooked, underestimated. Kids from neighborhoods no one expected to produce prodigies. Kids who deserved a chance. When she showed the idea to Marcus and her mother, they both smiled with tears in their eyes. "This isn't just your victory," Sarah said softly. "This is their beginning." And in that moment, Celine knew her journey wasn't only about proving herself. It was about opening doors for others who would come after her. Months later, Celine stood on a stage in Paris at the International Congress of Mathematicians. The hall stretched wide, filled with some of the greatest minds in the world. She was still small, still only 10, but when she began to speak, her voice carried strength far beyond her years. She shared not only her new framework but also her vision. A future where genius wasn't limited by privilege, where brilliance wasn't silenced by prejudice. When the crowd rose in applause, the sound thundered through her chest. She looked out, and for the first time she wasn't just fighting to belong. She was leading. Back in Cambridge, Harvard's yard stood blanketed in spring sunlight. Students hurried along the paths, books in hand, lives in motion. And among them walked Celine Jackson, notebook tucked under her arm, eyes bright with determination. She was no longer the janitor's daughter who didn't belong. She was the mathematician who had transformed Harvard, and was just beginning to transform the world.
Wow! If you stayed with us all the way to the end of this story, thank you so much for watching. The greatest lesson here is simple but powerful. No matter the prejudice, no matter the sabotage, true brilliance cannot be erased. Celine Jackson proved that resilience and courage can turn the impossible into history. If this story inspired you, please support the channel by hitting that subscribe button, sharing this video with your friends and loved ones, and helping us spread stories that uplift and empower. And don't forget, we'll be posting another powerful story tomorrow, so make sure you come back for that. In the meantime, check out the previous video that's now showing on your screen. You don't want to miss it.